I'm based in Basel, as I said. I've been now for over 12 years in the industry, in the healthcare industry, applying data science, and I'm just recently joined, I would say, since 2 years, Roche, and I look forward to hear the panel discussion that we're going to have, where there are going to be very senior people from other top pharma companies, which I actually know also personally, and I know they are very insightful. So I'm sure it will be an interesting chat.
Tonya, as well, if you can switch on the camera, please. Gonzalo, if you can switch on the camera, please. Then Mikhail, 1 second. Mikhail is going to join probably in several seconds, but yes, he just joined as well. Mikhail, okay, co-host option. Let's go. So Mikhail as well now goes to the main screen. So now you can start slowly introducing yourselves till I have Valerie as well joining.
Yes, maybe Mikhail, you want to go next after a bit?
Absolutely. So my name is Mikhail Kachala, and I am leading the data science organization in bioconsumer health. And as you know, consumer health is quite different from pharma. First of all, we are much smaller. That is why we have only one data science team covering all the functions in the organization. So we have projects in research and development, in product supply, in marketing and sales, and in finance areas. And for us, it's very important to drive all the projects very efficiently. So that's why I'm very interested in participating in this panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Mikhail. Tonya, you want to go next?
Hello, I'm Tonya. I'm heading the AI and Analytics Center of Excellence in Novo Nordisk, the Global IT. And we also work across the organization, all the way from R&D to product supply and commercial. And
Tonya, sorry for interrupting you. Your quality is very bad. I don't know the microphone. We can't hear you.
I don't know, is it better now?
Now it's getting better.
I have to be very close to my computer.
Yeah.
And so then we are data science working across the organization and also building the necessary infrastructure from software engineering perspective in our MLOps platform.
Thank you very much, Tonya. Indeed, yes, if you can speak closer, I think it's helpful. Gonzalo, you want to go next?
Yeah, thank you, Marco. Good afternoon. My name is Gustavo Gorban. I'm working for Almiral, a Spanish pharmaceutical company. I'm heading the data and analytics. And also, as Mikhail said, Antonia, a lot of things common. I'm here to learn and share experience in order to grow for the future.
Thank you, Gonzalo. Last panelist, Valerie. Hello.
Thank you, Marco. Okay, so I'm Valerie. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm leading the Janssen EMEA data and analytics strategy team. So we're working essentially on commercial analytics, but also on medical analytics for Janssen EMEA. And was there any question I had to answer or anything?
No, just an introduction. That's super. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So thanks everyone for introduction. Unfortunately, we are missing, apologies, Christian from Stada, who was also on the panel, but he had a last minute commitment. So we're missing Christian, and he's a great person that we know was able to share a lot of insights, but I'm sure with the four of the panelists here, you're gonna get a lot out of the session. So this one is about transforming healthcare in AI from an organizational operation point of view. So we're gonna focus on any topics related to workforce, structure, capabilities, operating model, and related topics. We're going to start with a few questions that we have kind of brainstormed on, where we think it would be worth to share some of our experience. Please, in the meantime, any questions, feel free to drop in the chat. I'm sure the panelists are going to be more than happy to answer any live questions, and we can take it from there.
Perfect. Just keep in mind, whenever you are not speaking, to make yourselves mute, please.
Yes, thank you, Monsieur. Good suggestion. So maybe I can start with you, Mikhail, and starting from maybe the very beginning of a life cycle of an AI or data science journey. How do you collect and prioritize the use cases that you're working on? Like, what is your experience? What are your best practices that you want to share?
Yeah, glad to share that. So when we start with the identification of the potential use cases, there are multiple ways that we can get our project. The first one is the easiest and most obvious. Somebody from the function approach us and say, okay, we have seen very nice presentation by our competitors. Let's do the same in our organization. Alternative can be that also somebody from function approaches us and says, we would like to do something in data science and AI. Let's have a workshop. Let's sit down together and let's see what can be done. I say in the last couple of years, we have more and more situations like this. But before it was slightly different because the data literacy, as we covered previously in these conversations, was not that high, and our organization was the main source of the ideas. So, and here also we had different ways of approaching that. In some cases, we had established analytical project where we have seen the opportunity for data science or AI part, because we have seen, okay, this is important business process, we have enough data, we can implement advanced analytic solutions. And there is only also one more alternative, which is probably the most exciting for the data scientist, when the data scientists themselves come up with an idea and then sell it to the business and then make this happen. So definitely this is one of the most challenging things, because you need to prove the value without any budget. But also we have driven some exciting projects using this way of identification of data science use cases. And when we're talking about prioritization, to be honest, we're using very simple metrics. So we can imagine metrics with two axes. One axis is feasibility, another axis is impact. And basically, the higher the impact, the more probable we will start this project. So, of course, the best situation is when we have high impact and high feasibility. This is like a no-brainer. But the next one is actually the projects which has high impact but low feasibility. Because yes, this experimental project, but it might bring much more value than, certain use case with less impact. And by feasibility, I mean all kind of things, right? So it's not only about feasible from technological perspective, but probably most importantly from the data perspective, right? So that we have enough and high quality data. So that's how we're doing this.
Thank you so much, Mikhail. Maybe from another panelist, from Tonya, anything you can share on this topic on collection and prioritization use cases?
Yes, and let me know, of course, if there are still issues.
I think it's better. Yes, thank you.
We also in the maturity level now that we are reached out with different ideas from line of business of what is possible, but converting an idea to use case, which for us that entails the feasibility and some understanding of the business value, we try to do what we call these data to wisdom sprints. So when we feel that we are not really sure either about the business value or the technical feasibility, then we work together with our business colleagues and say, okay, let's work together for 2 weeks. We bring our data scientists, you bring your business experts. And then for 2 weeks, we try to list the ideas or the hypothesis. And with the end of these 2 weeks, we try to have one or multiple POCs. And based on these learnings, then we get some understanding if there's some signal in the noise and if the data is good enough and we have the technology to go further. And if that's the case, then that becomes a more use case that is ready for an MVP. And then we have a backlog of use cases that are ready for MVP. A lot of the times, of course, that's not the case. So then we get a lot of learnings of what should we improve in the data and what else we should do if we ever want to convert this idea to a use case. But at least when it becomes a use case, then we prioritize this in 3 attributes. But I like Michael's that has 2 because it's easier to visualize them. On the first attribute is, of course, what is the business value, or at least the perceived business value from our business colleagues. The second is the capability building. There are a lot of things that are not necessarily direct business value, but for example, we just got our first machine learning model approved by the Danish medical authorities in a GMP setting. And that specific project, it didn't have the same business value compared to other projects. However, we got the necessary knowledge of how to do machine learning in a GMP and GXP setting, which later feed up to our MLOps platform and of course feed up to other projects. So that was a capability project. So together with the business value is the capability building And the third term we use internally in the team is the coolness factor. I know it's very weird, but it's sometimes, depending on where the organization is we have some pet projects, for example, using the synthetic video to personalize patient clusters. This will not have any direct business value, we all know it here, but at least increase the understanding and the imagination of what is possible. So of course, business value, capability building, and sometimes this coolness factor.
Thank you so much, Tonya. Super interesting, and thank you also, Mikhail, for that. Then maybe moving on, after the use case, let's say, has been identified, has been prioritized, and then you start with the use cases. Maybe Valerie, if you can share what are your recommendation or your suggestion on how do you get the maximum adoption of a use case or whatever solution, and of course the maximum impact or outcome, as also Mikhail was suggesting before. What are your recommendations there?
Yes. Thank you, Marco. So typically, I mean, when we start with one of these use cases that we want to develop and to work on, from our side, it also comes logically that it fits with the strategic direction of the company and and with our strategic goals and objectives, right, for the next 2-3 years at least, right? But typically, when it's something new, we would start with a pilot. So we would select maybe one brand, one country where we want to experiment something new, and I think it's important to choose the right pilot, the right brand country combination in that sense, right? Where, as Mikhail said, the data makes it feasible, but also where we will have the business stakeholders that will be available to help us understand the data, that will also be acting in a constructive manner because it's something innovative, right? So we need to really build this partnership to make sure we have a successful pilot. So that's really important, I think, to pick the best situation. Maybe not the best, but we could also pick 2 different situations, an easy one somehow and a tougher one, right? But I think it's important to choose the right pilot situations. And then here comes for me the importance of the analytics translation, really, and the analytics translator. And it's not just applying a methodology, an analytical methodology, but it's really about understanding and refining the business question, because we may as well change slightly, or even more than slightly, the business question from the original idea to when we start executing on this project. It might change actually, and we very often need to refine and slightly change the business question, right? And sometimes one business question leads to another one, very, very much connected. So that's an iterative process, I would say, right? So for me, it's really important in these pilots to do this very well, and then to align on the recommendations. Usually we get some insights, right? And if possible, actionable recommendations to improve business outcome. That can be in pharma business outcome, that can be HCP engagement, patient outcomes, all that, right? So obviously we work with different targets in the end in mind. And it's really important to go through these different iterations and to do this business translation, analytics translation really well, so that we can align with the business stakeholders on the actionable recommendations that come from the insights that we have generated from the pilot. So that's for me the first step. And then once we have done that, we can go back to senior leadership, we can go back to the region, to the global organization, in our case, and to show then the insights and recommendations that we got from the pilot. And then here comes the decision where whether we want to scale, whether we want to replicate the pilot in another situation, or whether we want to really scale at a larger scale. Right. So that's how I see it about the adoption, right? About the adoption, and then measuring the impact is something I will let maybe to someone else to comment on.
maybe Gonzalo, if you can follow up on that, a similar question, right? So adoption and impact.
Thank you, Marco, and it's good to listen everybody, because I think we're facing kind of very similar issues. You mentioned, Mikhail, that sometimes the prioritization comes from somebody heard that other company is doing something, and we want to replicate. And I talked this to you, Marco, out of this, and you did us not a good thing in Novartis while doing the forecasting, because everybody heard about it and they want to replicate in a smaller company. So the reality is different, but it's good to try and go in the same direction, knowing to seize the expectations, internal expectations. I think it's something critical. Building from what you mentioned, Valerie, I think everything should start in the business, as you mentioned. We need to engage the business and we need to show value. So it's very important to select the pilot, as you mentioned, something that we can easily show something, then business will get involved. And then once you show the methodology that it works, it will be much easier to replicate to other first countries, same brand, other countries, which would be my suggestion, and then different brands. I think that's very important. And I think we need to challenge the business people in order to do the correct questions. Is what you mentioned. We iterate, and from one, we be the translator, because sometimes the business people have very broad questions. We need to tackle and translate into very concrete data analysis. And we did it. I mean, we are normally doing it in a very agile way, showing what we are facing here in Almiral is we're showing notebooks to the business people so they can see the advance and they can guide us. And we in the not very complicated, don't turn it like the most complicated, but in a more not that sophisticated algorithm, it's the best way to engage with them. And they will not use Python, but they can understand and maybe they can guide us. And this is the best way to avoid that the first request after 2 months is not, I mean, whenever we show the output is not exactly the same. And also we're challenging the business people in order to make sure that dashboard or the output of an algorithm is absolutely never the end. It is to make an action. We need to make something different. It's about the people, it's about the way of working. And whenever we do it, we need to see what happens and then show to the organization. Because sometimes, I know, sometimes in the organization, I don't know if it happens to you, but in our organization, it looks like a dashboard is the final point. Okay, I deliver. No, what is going to be the usage of that? What actions are we going to make? This is the thing that we need to move forward, I think.
Very well said, both Gonzalo and Valerie. Thank you for that. And maybe following up on that for you, Tonya. So we have identified and prioritized the use case, then we have looked after achieving maximum adoption of it. Once this up and running, if you want, once you get more the adult or mature phase, how do you continue to measure and monitor the impact of it and anything that you need to follow up, evolve, disrupt, stop? What are the things that you look after once it gets to that maturity level?
And I think sometimes that's the $1 million question, because what I find fascinating with our field, which is all about data measurement, we always fail to measure our own success of our projects. What we try to do, of course, similar to what Gonzalo said in the beginning, we usually work with machine learning, we connect the predicted outcome with the business KPI. But of course, there's always some inherent uncertainty on the model accuracy, on the change management that it takes until you see this ROI get realized. So what we try to do in between is we first measure how many users use the solution, treat everything we build like a product, then do sometimes A/B testing. So we just finished an uplift model in one of our markets. And of course, once again, it will take time until you actually see the real ROI, because the change management takes quite some lead time after. But what we try to do to see kind of the effect earlier is we do some A/B testing. So what if some sales reps, they use it and some others do not use it? What is the difference of the effect? So A/B testing and of course use as metrics. And then another thing that found at least that is useful for us until you see the ROI later in line is to find who are the super users of the solutions, who are the cheerleaders of the business. Sometimes they are few that really support what you're building, and maybe you have built it together. Back to also what Valerie maybe was mentioning, and there ask them to provide testimonials, even a quote of how happy they are they use it, to their upper management and to our upper management. And we have experienced in my previous company that it went all the way to the CEO, and that takes such a tailwind to the project, because we were trying to do something that it was not possible. So how can you measure? It was not possible before, so it was impossible for us to measure the effect. But having cheerleaders and people say that I use it and I'm so happy and it has helped me and saved me so many hours, sometimes that's equally important, having these testimonials, until you have the more measured ROI or usage metrics.
Thank you so much, Tonya. Gonzalo, I may come back to you on this one. Actually, if you can follow up again on a similar topic, what can you share from Admiral or your previous amazing experience that you had in other companies?
Thanks, Marco. I think Tonya covered almost everything, the scope now, but I think it's how to measure. Business people needs to measure. If possible, as our former CEO said, I don't care, Gonzalo, the currency of the measure. It could be euros or dollars. So that's kind of the objective, and we know that many times it's not possible because we are going fast, we're giving more information, something like that. But I think we need to, as you mentioned, Tonya, ask the business how are we helping you with these outputs? Sometimes if we are looking at the industrial manufacturing thing, okay, we're saving electricity, is easier. Okay, we reduce 20%, multiply by, blah, okay, there's a euro thing. If we're reducing the bulk material that we need to put in, okay, it's easy. But in many times of research or that we do web scrapping, automatic NLP or whatever, we reduce 50% of my time that normally takes 2 months. Well, that's a measure. But we really need to make the business, as you mentioned, Tony, explain it. Because by doing that, we do two things: put value on the work and also make other colleagues think about similar approaches, similar use cases that can be good and useful for the company. And of course, what you mentioned, you explained it very well. I mean, the A/B testing, the control groups and all these things, because we need to really be data facts. So we need to change. Not many months ago, we made an algorithm and the reps did the same in the two territories, and they asked, can you give us the attribution? I said, no, of course not. We asked you to do different things. How are we gonna? We need to really, it's an iteration, but it's okay. I think we need to make people understand this and ask for it. So I think it's the way.
Thank you so much, Gonzalo and Tonya. Super interesting. Maybe I can see that there already is a question there. I may finish with something else before and invite everyone else who has questions, because I'm going to finish with one. Potentially, it's $1 million question, right, for the panelists here, which is, okay, now we have identified different views on how an AI and data science solutions can grow from ideation all the way to the maturity level, the highest maturity level. My $1 million question is, what are your tips based on your team structure, on your team organization that you put in place in order to achieve all the things that we just discussed? Whatever you can share, I think the audience here would be super interested. You are all leading pretty large and impactful teams. So we really want to hear either from your current or previous learnings in other companies. Maybe, Mikhail, you were the first one starting the session. You have maybe the one starting the last question as well. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Yes, this is a very important question, maybe one of the most important that we have in our operation. And the really great thing about the organization is that data scientists are very smart people, right? So, and they really can operate by themselves and understand the priorities of the organization and priorities of the company. And it appears very naturally that the longer you work with a certain domain, the better you understand the domain, and at the same time, the better your network in this domain is. So that makes it very easy for you to become the trusted advisor for the people in this domain. So I have seen it in my team. So our team is quite young, right? So a bit more than 2 years, but I can already see that within the team we can informal sub-teams which are forming, right? So people who are working more on the research and development cases, they spend more time with themselves, they spend more time with the stakeholders in this area, and it's really growing into like sub-organization. And they already became trusted advisor for the people in the R&D. So this really goes hand in hand. And I mean, I see my role as a manager only to support this and also to enable our team to make this happen.
Thank you so much, Mikhail. Valerie, maybe if I can ask your view on this last question on the team structure and organization.
Sure.
Thank you.
So I agree with Mikhail, actually. My answer will probably go in the same direction. I can share a little bit my experience when I joined Janssen and when I joined this team. It was a small team at the beginning, and there was not really a clear team structure, meaning that people were working on diverse projects. It was not really clear who was doing that, also who was doing what. Also, from a stakeholder perspective, was not really easy for the stakeholders to kind of target and contact the right person in the data analytics team, right? So the way I've been thinking about it is, can we specialize a bit more, right? So it's always, I would say, it's always, there are always waves in my experience, right? When you want to become more specialist somehow and you want to create a stronger expertise, and then maybe at some point you need to move away from that and become more generalist. So there can be different trends, you know, and it doesn't mean that it's going to remain like this forever. But at that stage, what I thought was that we needed more specialization and to establish a stronger expertise by what I call analytics domain. And so that aligns quite well with the types of stakeholders on one side, and the type of business decisions that we're driving, but also the type and the granularity of the data that we're working on. So in my case, it's more on one side, HCP engagement type of analytics, brand performance type of analytics, and patient insights analytics. So that's kind of how I designed this in our case, and obviously it can be very different from company to company, and depending on the level of maturity of data analytics maturity as well. And then these people within these pillars are responsible for designing, owning, and designing, executing, and owning the analytic solutions that we produce. So can be a dashboard, but can be also a more advanced analytic solution, leveraging AI, machine learning, right? And then they also do the analytics translation, right, that I was referring to, and we were speaking about in the previous sections. And then what's important as well is to really have the underlying data strategy, which is sometimes harder to fund, right? And to get the funding for, and to explain why we need a data governance, why we need a data strategy and all that, and including increase the level of data maturity of the company, increase data literacy and all that. I could speak about this forever, but I will stay quite summarized on this one. But this, for me, supports the analytics domains that I just spoke about. So that's kind of how I've designed and organized the teams when I joined 2 years ago. And I think then there can be again an evolution. It's not fixed forever, because then we might at some point move to kind of a hub of analytics translators, owning the whole end-to-end analytics domains that I just mentioned. We might need people who still have the ownership of the analytics solutions that we have created. So it might evolve, but at some point, depending again on the maturity stage where we are, I think it's important to create this expertise to really make clear who is taking care of what, and to create, like Mikhail was saying, the strong relationship with the stakeholders to become trusted advisor to a certain population somehow within the company.
Thank you, Valerie. It's super interesting. I can read more about the natural evolution of team structure. Now going to the question that I can see. The first one is a pretty tough one. It is a tough one. I'll give it to you, Gonzalo, if you don't mind. And saying about that sometimes there are many months that takes in order to develop a solution. How do you manage justified expectations on timelines for commercial and business stakeholders? That's from Magnet, from Amgen.
Oh, thanks, and it's a very, as you mentioned, very tough question. I think it's very related to what Valerie mentioned about data strategy and data governance. Because at the end of the day, for me, it's about data accountability in the organization. So we really need to make sure, of course, to have the sponsorship from the CEO and all these things, but more important than that, it's to make the business people really aware of what needs to happen in order to have a dashboard, an advanced analytic algorithm, or something like that. We need to make sure that they are accountable of making a good ownership and stewardship of the data in order to make the process quicker. Because if we do not have the data good with the data catalog and all these things, whatever simple analysis is going to take months. And it's not because we need to really, but the bad thing is that data governance is not something fancy. As you, I think it was you, Mikhail, no, it was you, Tonya, the last part that you mentioned, the coolest factor, is not cool at all, but it's absolutely the foundation in order to go fast. So we need to go into velocities and explain it very well, but there's not one direct answer, sorry, because it's a matter of making the members of the management board understanding how tough it is and why we need their team to do the correct questions, and also to manage and stewardship of the data, because if not, it's not going to happen. I don't think we're going to find a problem that it's a matter of technology. Technology it's only an enabler, a facilitator, and goes so quick. The problem is that we can have bad data or bad people using the data. That's more common. So I think it would be, I'm sorry for not giving a direct answer, but it's by talking a lot and making accountable business people so they can understand the dependencies of the questions, so they will understand that a question A, it's a matter of 3 months, and question B, it's a matter of 1 year.
Super. Thank you so much, Gonzalo. The next question, I know it's a question that all of you would love to answer. I want to pick maybe on you, Tonya, on this one, which is from Eric from Ferring, asking, how do you attract and retain data scientists and engineers in your organization? I will add, how you attract, you grow, and retain talent eventually.
Exactly, and that's a very important question, especially in a market like this, right? They attract, we try to build first the critical mass, and of course, how to build the critical mass in the beginning, that's the most difficult. But at least now I found that we have quite some nice and senior profiles in the team, so at least when other people want to reach out, they feel, okay, that's a solid team where I can learn from. And another thing that we start experimenting now, to be a little more out there with universities, to start giving more internships, more collaborations, so that will help the earliest, to attract the earlier talent after you have the critical mass of senior. And the retain is data science. First of all, they want to work with other people and other data scientists, and they also want to constantly learn, at least a lot of them, because the field changes. So what we do, we offer, like, at least in our way world, we work with AWS, so we offer AWS cloud certification to everybody. And every training they want, we have Safari or early learning platform. We really endorse getting time and getting the certifications and getting any training they want. And then, of course, as Valerie said, it makes sense to focus on a specific area and start gaining knowledge on this, domain knowledge on this. But we try also to with these data to wisdom sprints, to allow people to work in different parts as well, at least to still, if you work with images, to spend one sprint over the quarter on NLP or something else. And then, of course, focus a lot on the culture. We got very much inspired by the Netflix model. And of course, as you know, pharma is the corporate opposite of Netflix. But at least having a chief feedback officer, and we have a chief entertainment officer, people that take these roles. And every time in the interviews and stuff, we also mention the cultural part, because it's also important to people think that they might, especially some data science, might come with a specific predisposition of what is pharma. So we also have to show them that we try to be like a small startup inside the organization, and we try to do different things. So because ultimately, at least I feel that we compete with tech companies and startups to attract this talent.
Super. Thank you so much, Tonya. There is another one from Joyce from Bayer. Maybe Mikhail, you can also help a colleague of yours there, which is, how do you handle the mindset from the business management team viewing data science projects as always nice to have, but not really bread and butter, right? And then you follow up saying, especially under a fast-paced commercial settings, right? Which is the one where you're very much familiar with.
Thanks a lot for this question. So the short answer is you have to prove the value. So it doesn't matter if the project is nice to have, if it brings 100 or 1000% ROI, right? It's not a no-brainer. You should do this. But on the second part, actually, the data science project has even more value in the fast-paced commercial setting. So in the last couple of years, we all know with the Corona events, the data science projects, for example, in forecasting area performed much better than the manual forecast that we have used to before. So I think it's not about nice to have or bread and butter. It's really about the competitive advantage that the project brings.
Thank you so much, Mikhail. Maybe there's one from Christian from Novartis, and Valerie, I don't know if you can help with this one. She's stating, and then therefore, of course, asking a comment. For AI projects, I've made the experience that the Agile approach is preferable to ensure continuous business feedback and engagement. However, the transition period is a challenge itself, as quite often you need to serve toward the Agile ceremonies and a hierarchical steerco setups and budget control. Have you experienced that, as well as how have you addressed it eventually?
I'll do my best to answer this tricky question. Thank you, Marco. But my experience with Agile, maybe taking a bit of a broader perspective on the Agile methodology. I mean, obviously, we're not doing waterfall anymore. I think we're all doing kind of Agile, right? And that's the kind of which is important here, because we're all saying we're doing Agile. In fact, we're not all doing Agile, in my view, or there are different ways of doing Agile, applying the Agile methodology. So it's not just about delivering value in sprints. Actually, in some cases, sprints even slow down the delivery, in my view. So we are even talking about potentially moving to continuous deployment, continuous delivery. So that's a big thing in itself. You know, I don't want to enter this world, but just saying that in some cases, that was our case recently, the length of the sprint and the fact that we need one sprint for development, and then we need one sprint for UAT, and then we need to validate that. So it actually takes more time than doing than developing outside of the sprint. So there are also downsides. But I think basically what we have really experienced in terms of Agile is when there are too many handoffs, right? Is really that we're not Agile. Essentially, we're against the definition of Agile. When even if we are working with the Agile Scrum methodology in sprints and all that, right, with the Scrum Master and all that, if there are handoffs, then we're not fully Agile. And I think that's what we have observed. And therefore, we're now moving to the squad model with integrated squad teams, which I think, hopefully, I have big hopes, right? Hopefully will help the developers better understand the business needs and will really shorten this cycle of development, UAT, and bug fix as well. Shouldn't forget that, and then delivering the final product in the end. So that's a bit my experience with Agile.
Thank you so much for sharing, Valerie. Musin, do we have time for one last question, or
one last question? Yes.
Okay, the last one, maybe for you, Gonzalo, if you can, which I believe is connected to one of the things that you were talking before, which is, are there specific profiles among business users who are better suited to become citizen data scientists, right? You were talking before about adoption and how do you manage expectations. Which are the ones that you would
Thanks, Marco, for the opportunity. And let me reconfirm what Valerie said. Agile for me is flexible. It's not deliver something if you are not flexible to move the target a little bit. It's not agile, for example. And if you do not do the bug fixing at the end, it's not agile. So I think it's the agile is moving target with the business people, knowing that the moving target needs to be kind of a little bit fixed. With the citizen data scientists, I think the most important thing is that they do have business knowledge, and we experience, for example, in R&D. In R&D, in research, it's absolutely a different animal. It's better to put a bioinformatic that has biological and chemistry knowledge to do mathematics than a mathematics to move to the other side. In the rest of the areas, and it's exactly what we're doing in Almiral, because we try to help the research team, but it's so tough that we decided to hire experts on that area. And the rest of the areas that are more intuitive, commercial, industrial, I think the important thing is that they do know the business and the process, and then help them. They're eager to touch some things about technology, not very